Oh man, so you guys having a good week? How many of you guys like when it gets colder like this? Right? How many of you guys are already missing summer? If Tiffany is normally up here in the morning, she's sick today. She's probably like just sick because she hates that it's cold and doesn't want to come outside. So we're going to have to give her some junk about that. But either way, no big deal. Hey, if you've got a Bible with you this morning, or if you just got your note sheet there, we're going to start out this morning in the book of Exodus, chapter 18. Exodus is the second book of the Bible. So even if you're not familiar with where things are in the Bible, you don't have to go very far to get to it. If you get to Leviticus, you're going to read about some scabs and you've gone too far. So Exodus 18 is where we're going to be this morning, and we're kicking off a brand new message series this morning, simply titled, and I know it probably has caught your eye because it caught a lot of people's eye when we were at Portugal weeks ago, called "It Doesn't Have to Suck." Now, a couple things that we'd automatically hear about this series was, one thing, they're like, people would laugh a little bit and be like, "Oh, a church just said suck." And I'm like, yeah, we're not doing it for shock value, but there's a reason for it. And then the second thing we would get is people would say, well, what is it? Like, what is it? What is the it you're talking about? And that one's a little bit more difficult to unpack in a really quick way, because the truth is it can be a lot of things. And it for me might look very different than it looks for you, or it looks for the person sitting next to you, or that it even looks like for somebody who's living in the same house as you, because it is quite simply just what sucks the life out of us. Right, so for some of us, it's what keeps us up at night. For some of us, it's what stresses us out every time we look at our bank account online. For some of us, it's every time that somebody likes us, sends us a text message, or somebody we've been dating or wanting to date shoots us a text message, or whatever else people do now that they're dating. I haven't dated for like 8 years. I've been married for a little while. So whatever it is you do, but whatever it is, it's that thing that when you think about it, it just, man, it takes everything out of you. So whatever it is, we're going to talk about it for the next 6 weeks. We're going to talk about the things that suck the life out of you, those things that make you feel miserable from time to time. And so just to give you a little heads up, next week, the it we're talking about is money. And you might be sitting here wondering, well, why would a church talk about money? Well, number one, like we say this all the time, Jesus talks about money as far as parables and stories go, more than he talks about heaven and hell combined. Also, money is one of the leading causes of divorce and just in general, just unhappiness. And so, of course, as a church, we're going to attack that. And then 2 weeks from today, we're going to talk about the it being marriage. For many of us, whether you're married now or you were married before or you want to be married in the future, marriage is one of those things that creates a lot of tension. And if you don't do it well, can suck the life out of you. And sometimes even when you do it well, it's still very difficult. And so we're going to talk about it being marriage in a couple weeks. But today, we're going to talk about the it that we're simply just going to call work. We're going to talk about your career. We're going to talk about your job, how you spend your time at work, how you think about your time at work. And once again, you might be wondering, well, why are we talking about work? Well, the truth is, if you look at stats, you're going to see that you're going to spend roughly 1/3 of your life at work. And we believe that Jesus, once again, if we're going to have a relationship with him, we don't do that part-time. And so if we're going to have a relationship with Jesus, it's going to impact how we relate to ourselves and to others, even at our jobs. And so we're going to look at how work doesn't have to suck. And before we do that, we're going to read just a few verses here out of Exodus chapter 18. And we're going to start in verse 13. And it says this. It says, the next day, Moses took his seat to hear the people's disputes against each other. They waited before him from morning till evening. When Moses' father-in-law saw all that Moses was doing for the people, he asked, what are you really accomplishing here? Why are you trying to do all this alone while everyone stands around you from morning till evening? Moses replied, because the people come to me to get a ruling from God. When a dispute arises, they come to me, and I am the one who settles the case between the quarreling parties. I inform the people of God's decrees and give them his instructions. And Jethro, the father-in-law, he responds this way. He says, this is not good. You're going to wear yourself out, and the people too. This job is too heavy a burden for you to handle all by yourself. And then Jethro, his father-in-law, who has like the coolest name ever, he gives him some really practical advice on what he should do if he's going to have a healthier relationship with the work that God's given him. And then in verse 23, he gives him this promise. He says, if you follow this advice, and if God commands you to do so, because even your best advice, if it's not godly advice, you can throw it out. And if God commands you to do so, then you will be able to endure the pressures, and all these people will go home in peace. Once again, we're talking this morning about how work doesn't have to suck, how you can actually find a career that you enjoy, and even if you don't necessarily enjoy it now, you can get a lot more out of it. All right? Let's pray together. Jesus, we thank you for the time that you've given us to be here with each other this morning. God, I know that every single time we come together, man, it's incredibly special. And we have a chance to really learn together, grow together, not just as friends and as a community of faith, but also as followers of you. And so, God, this morning, my prayer once again is that as you're speaking to us, that we would hear you and we would also have the courage to listen. And once again, we're just going to lob a prayer out there for the Bengals who are on the West Coast because we want them to win. And we'll even pray for the Browns because, everybody needs something every once in a while. So we love you. We thank you so much. And it's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Amen. I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to think about it. Don't answer it because, this probably doesn't apply anymore because all of us in here are at least high school age or more. The question is this: what do you want to be when you grow up? What do you want to be when you grow up? I don't know about you, but I got asked this question a whole lot when I was growing up. I can remember being in class, different ages, different stages of life, and people would ask me, they'd say, Anthony, what do you want to be when you grow up? And depending on the phase of life I was in, I would give them incredibly different answers, right? So I remember as a kid watching, I was a huge pro wrestling fan as a kid. I remember watching Hulk Hogan body slam Andre the Giant. This guy was like 7'2" or 3", I think, 500 pounds. And I went, man, I want to be a professional wrestler. And then I thought about it. I thought, well, that probably hurts a lot. I'm not that tough. And so I want to be a commentator because I want to watch the matches up close. I want to see these things. Then kind of grew out of that. Now I might still like to be a professional wrestler because I realize it doesn't hurt as much as I used to think it did, but not what I want to do. And then I remember as a kid for Halloween one year, because I used to love Halloween. I still love Halloween because you get free candy. I mean, who doesn't love candy? And I would go and my parents would just basically tell me what I was going to dress up as. I didn't really put any thought into it because if I put thought into it, it was going to be like, just give me a bag and I'm going to walk around the neighborhood. But they decided, my mom started working at a pharmacy and they decided that I should dress up like her boss. And so they put me in these big nerdy glasses, combed my hair over, put the lab coat on me, and I was a pharmacist for the night named Jerry. And I thought, man, I think I want to be a pharmacist. And then I worked in a pharmacy for about 6 years, and I thought, it is not worth the money that you get paid to put up with this all day. Didn't want to do it. Didn't want to work in a pharmacy. And then I remember, too, I was a huge basketball fan growing up. I loved Michael Jordan. I had like the Air Jordan jacket, which my parents still have. I will give it one day when I have a son to him, and he will love it because Michael Jordan's the greatest basketball player ever. And I remember wearing this, and I thought, I want to be a basketball player. And so I'm not good at math, but I did the math one day, and I realized that there's about 300 people professionally playing basketball in the NBA at a given time. And I thought, from my little hometown of Harrison, Ohio, well, I'm like the second or third best player on my team. I could definitely be one of the best 300 players in the world, right? Because everything just seemed smaller than, I remember my dad, I love him. But it was like the first time my dad was like, really, son? Really? Right? So he wasn't trying to crush my dream, but totally crushed my dream, Dad, when you see this on video. Thank you. So I wanted to be an NBA player, but see, here's the thing. When people ask you that question, you go through phases. I even remember as a senior in high school, it was right before I became a Christian, I wanted to go into sports business. There was a college just across the river in northern Kentucky, and I thought, man, I can go there. I can get a sports business degree. The guy in charge of the degree was one of the talk radio hosts there, and I got to meet him. I got to talk about the program and talk about how I could intern with teams. Cincinnati Reds and the Bengals, and maybe even go down to the horse park in northern Kentucky, and I could intern there. And I thought, man, this would be awesome. And guess what? I didn't end up going to school for that either. But when people ask you the question, what do you want to be when you grow up? It makes you think about a lot of different things. But for every single one of us, when you think about it as a kid, or maybe as a high school senior, or as a college, college student, you answer that question very differently than many adults do. Because you think that through that question, you're thinking about the dream. You're thinking about like what could be, right? You get excited about your future, but what happens is over time, even if you end up in the field of your dreams, you kind of look at it now and go, what happened? Have you ever had a job like that where you've been working and all of a sudden you go, what am I even doing? I hate this job. You're in a job maybe you thought you'd love, like me when I worked in a pharmacy. I thought this would be the greatest thing ever. And then I get yelled at by people who are coughing on me, and I'm thinking, what am I even doing here? Over time, you start out with this great dream, this great vision of what could be and what should be for your life, and then you realize, like, man, it is just not at all what I hoped it was. And Moses, the man we read about this morning in Exodus 18, he's probably honestly in a very similar place. When we meet Moses, or when God meets Moses through the form of a burning bush, God's speaking to Moses and he gives him this incredible call. He gives him this great job. He gives him this great task. He says, Moses, I want you to go back to Egypt and I want you to lead my people out of slavery, and you're going to take them to this promised land, to this place where they can prosper, this place where they can thrive. I want you to lead them there. And so that's an incredible thing for God to go out of his way like that to get your attention. And then he's telling you, by the way, you're going to lead all these people. It's going to be a great job. It's going to be incredible. And Moses gets a front row seat. He gets to see the miracles. He gets to see how God uses ordinary people. He gets to see how God can take people in an unlikely situation and lead them out, how God can take care of them even when it seems like there's no way they could ever be taken care of. Moses gets front row for all of this. But now in Exodus 18, he's at this place where he's literally just spinning his wheels. He doesn't really have a calling anymore as much as he's just managing a job. And so in Exodus 18, what we find out a few verses before what we read is that Jethro, his father-in-law, is bringing his family back to him because as best as we can tell, when things were getting really tense and he was in Egypt, he sent his wife and sons to live with his father-in-law to keep them safe. And the thought was, well, once we're safe, then they'll come back and live with me, but a good bit of time has passed. And so Jethro comes into town. He's the father-in-law. He's got the kids with him. He's got the family with him. And he decides, after hearing about everything that God's done, they have this great dinner party and they're excited and they praise God for everything that he's done. He decides, I'm going to go to work with Moses tomorrow. Now, my father-in-law every once in a while comes to church here on Sunday morning. He'll come in town. And here's what I'll tell you. When my father-in-law comes in town, I want to make sure that day that I'm on point, right? Because you don't want your father-in-law to think you're a big idiot. Okay, so when I met my wife, we were freshmen in college. And I remember the first time I met him, I was already intimidated because when I met him, he was much bigger than he is now. And it was raining outside. And he's loading up all this furniture out of her dorm room and throwing it in the back of this U-Haul with rain dripping off of him. And he just looks like he could kill somebody, okay? But not only that, he's a college professor. He's a retired college professor. He is stinking brilliant. And so my GPA game had to step up big time when I met my wife, okay? When I met my wife that semester, I'm pretty sure I got a 2.0. And all of a sudden, my grades just had to get better, right? Because I'm I can't look like a big idiot. We don't want to look foolish in front of our father-in-law, right? Guys, you definitely understand this. You want to make sure you impress the people that are close to your wife. And so Jethro comes to work with him, and he just observes all day. He says, okay, I'm just going to watch. All these great things are happening. I want to see it for myself. I missed all the miracles. I want to see now what's happening here. What's God doing here? And so Jethro watches him all day. He watches Moses sit there from morning until evening, watches him go over these disputes with people, some big, some really small, some significant, some insignificant. And then Jethro asks Moses a couple questions. He says, what are you really accomplishing here? And basically, why are you doing it this way? What are you really accomplishing here, and why are you doing it this way? He asked a question that every single one of us at some point have to confront ourselves when it comes to the work that we're doing. What are you doing, and why are you doing it? See, Jethro, he hears the great stories of everything God's done, everything that God wants to do through Moses, and then he looks at what Moses is doing, and it doesn't at all look like it's compatible. So you're telling me you're supposed to lead people into the promised land. Now you're kind of sitting here halfway. You're in the middle, and you're just managing. So what are you doing, and why are you doing it? And these are important questions because all of us know, no matter what you're doing, it's easy to get caught up in what you're doing. Right? You just get used to the routine because it's safe, it's comfortable, it's normal, it's nice, and you settle into it, and it keeps you from really moving forward. Here's a great example. The last church I worked at over in North Hill, loved the church. It was awesome. I lived about 10 minutes away if I drove my car because I had to go down my street onto Route 8 through the Central Interchange in the morning, which always a little bit of traffic, right? And then off onto Glenwood, onto Dan Street, and I'd sit at my desk and all that. Now, I worked there for about 5 years. Can I tell you how many times I would get all the way there and I'd sit down at my desk and I'd literally go, I don't remember how I got here. I don't remember taking a turn. I don't remember turning my car on. I don't remember signaling, looking to see if I was going to cut somebody off. I don't remember pulling in the parking lot, taking off my seatbelt, putting my lunch away. I don't remember anything. I just would get all the way there, sit at my desk and be like, how'd that happen, right? Sometimes to the point where you want to check and see if your car's even there because you're like, what just happened here? You just don't know, right? Because when you do the same thing day after day, it gets easy just to get into so much of a rhythm that you don't even think about it anymore. See, Moses is now at a place where he's just doing the same thing day after day. There are so many disputes with all the people, because it's not like he's leading 25 people, right? He's leading hundreds of thousands of people out in the middle of nowhere. They're setting up civilization, and he's leading them. And so day after day, from the time he gets up, he might say goodbye to some people he likes because his family's not even there. He goes and sits down, and he judges all day, morning till evening. He's just doing the same thing over and over and over again. He's just keeping busy. But we've all seen, you can be incredibly busy. It doesn't mean you're actually doing anything, right? He's so used to what he's doing that it doesn't even matter anymore. It doesn't even register with him anymore. And then Jethro asks the second question. He says, why? Like, why in the world is everyone standing here? What are you accomplishing? Because everyone's standing here. You're doing all this alone. Everyone's just standing around watching you. Why do you do what you do? I think the answer for many of us is very simple. Why do we do it? Because it's what I do. Right? So like, why do I go to work? Well, because I work at this place. Like, why do I show up at the place I do? Well, because that's just what I do. It's just a very easy answer. But the truth is, the why for us when we're dreaming starts out as something much deeper. When we're thinking about the future, it starts out as something much more exciting. Right? When you think about the career even maybe that you're in now, maybe 10 years ago you would have been incredibly pumped up about it. But now you're just going through the motions. So he asked the question, why? Why are you doing what you're doing? What's your motivation? Because the truth is this, our motivation, it tends to change. Moses' motivation to start was God told him to lead people. Now why is he doing what he's doing? It's because it's more comfortable to manage God's people. It's more comfortable just to keep busy doing what we think we should be doing rather than doing what we know is most important. Why do you do what you do? So Jethro asks him this question. Moses doesn't know yet that Jethro disapproves, and so he simply answers the question. When Jethro says, what are you doing and why do you do it? Moses answers, he says, because the people come to me to get a ruling from God. When people fight, they want to hear from me. They want to know what I think. See, really what Moses has done now is he's gotten himself confused. He says, they come to me. It's all about me. It's about what I can do for them. He's confused now because here's what he thinks. I'm necessary. I'm needed. Now, that doesn't mean that Moses isn't needed, right? He played a great role, but what we see is this. If you read the story ahead, Moses is not the one that leads them into the promised land. But he's saying, the people come to me to get a ruling from God. I'm the only one that can do these things. He wants to feel needed. He wants to feel necessary. And let's be real. Don't we all? Like, don't you want to feel needed when you come home? Like when you walk in the door, especially for us fellas, right? When something's broken, like right now my dryer is broken, right? I love the feeling that I'm downstairs tearing it apart and my wife looks at me and she is impressed, right? Because I got the sleeveless shirt on, little bead of sweat rolling down, guns on display, right? I ripped it apart. I still haven't put it back together because I'm not quite sure how to do it. But I love the fact that I feel like she's impressed by me. It makes me feel like I'm needed, like I'm necessary in my home. We love that feeling, right? Like you love it. Let's be real. You love it when you're at work and somebody comes to you with a problem. You're going to act annoyed, right? Like, oh, can't you just do this yourself? And then you do it. And if you weren't asked to do it, you'd probably be upset. You'd be like, well, I could have helped. Right? We love the feeling like we're needed, like we're necessary. Moses is saying, hey, the people come to me to get a ruling from God. When they fight, I'm the one who has to answer. Moses is saying, man, it's about me. I'm needed and I'm necessary. He's falling into a trap that every single one of us have fallen into. And so upon giving this answer to Jethro, Moses is probably thinking, how impressive am I? Right? You look at all these people, everything that's going on. You're saying, why do you do it? And what are you doing and why do you do it? And I'm saying, because I'm the man. I'm necessary. Everyone here, they need me. And so he's probably sitting there, because we've all done it, where you've shared something thinking somebody's going to think it's really funny or be really impressed, and then all of a sudden their reaction's very different than what you hoped, right? Married guys, you definitely understand this, right? You say something like, it's going to be really funny, and your wife goes, that's not funny. That's not funny, right? You're picking on me. So here's the deal. He shares this. He says, I'm necessary. I'm needed. The people need me to settle disputes. And then Jethro looks at him and he says this. He says, this is not good. this is not good. And can you just imagine for a second, if you're Moses and you're bragging on yourself and you feel really great about what you're doing, then all of a sudden the person whose affection you want in that moment says, yeah, it's not working, bro. Like it's just not good. It's not good. Moses probably went like from here to below whatever you can be below in a basement, right? He just had to feel terrible about it because all of a sudden he thought, I'm great, and now he's being told that what you're doing is not good. Can I tell you what I love about Jethro in this moment? Is that Jethro, he doesn't have the same blinders on that Moses has. Because Moses, just like us, when we're working on something and we're focused on something and we're focused on a goal, it gets incredibly easy to get so focused on that we don't realize what's going on all around us, and we don't even realize when we're starting to burn out. But Jethro looks at him and he says, this is not good. And what Jethro does for him, the gift he gives him, is that he is willing to be honest with Moses, even when Moses is unwilling or unable to be honest with himself. Jethro is willing to be honest with Moses, even when Moses is unwilling or unable to be honest with himself. And we all need somebody like that. We all need somebody who can look from the outside in and look at things like our marriage or like our job, like our finances, like the way we relate to our friends, like the way we relate to our kids. We need somebody who can be honest with us, even when we're unwilling or unable to be honest with ourselves. Jethro tells him not what he wants to hear, but what he needs to hear. And here's what I'll tell you, just a side note. If you only have people around you who tell you what you want to hear, if what you want to hear and what they say constantly lines up, you are missing out on the life you could have. Some of the greatest friends in your life are going to be the ones that are going to push you when you don't feel like being pushed, who are going to tell you the truth when it would be easier for them to say nothing. If you want to have a great friend, if you want to surround yourself with great people who are going to help you move forward, don't just find people who are going to tell you what you want to hear. Hang around people who are going to be honest enough with you, even when it makes you upset. Jethro says, this is not good. And then he tells him why it's not good. Here's the second part of this. If you're going to tell somebody that something's good or something's not good, do them a favor. Tell them why. Like, especially if you have kids. I don't have kids, but I work at a school throughout the week, and here's what I see all the time, is there are some kids who just immediately, the second they're told something is good or not good, they just either jump to the moon or feel like jumping off a cliff. They've never been appropriately affirmed before or appropriately checked before. Man, let people know why something isn't good, right? If they're making a decision that's poor, don't just tell them, well, that's a terrible decision. That's dumb. Because you know what? When you tell me that's dumb, you know what I want to do? I want to prove to you it's not dumb. But if you lovingly tell me why it's dumb, I'll follow along with that, right? So as a kid, how many of you guys wanted to play in the street all the time? I always wanted to play in the street. I grew up for the most part in a trailer park. I lived there till like 3rd or 4th grade. We didn't really have a front yard, okay? Our front yard was the street. And I always wanted to play in the street. But playing in the street's not a good idea, right? But if my parents had just said, hey, don't play in the street, that's stupid. Even as a little kid, I probably would have done it, right? But they tell me, here's why you don't play in the street. And I'm thinking, I don't want to get hurt, so I don't play in the street. If you're going to tell somebody that something's not good, let them know why. But Jethro says this, he says, it's not good because you're going to wear yourself out, and you're going to wear out everyone else around you too. See, Jethro gives him kind of the clue behind the scenes into what happens when we're overwhelmed and overworked. He says, you're going to get burned out, and everyone around you is going to get burned. See, a lot of times we just tend to think about how my work affects me, and we don't think about how it affects everyone else. We don't think about how it affects our friends and our children and the people who live next to us, the people we go to church with, the people we hang out with from time to time. We don't think about it. But when you're overwhelmed and overworked, when you're stuck in a routine that is unsustainable and unhealthy, you tend to burn everyone around you. Moses should have known this. Okay, Moses, I don't know if you know this or not, he's the guy that gets the 10 Commandments from God, right? He has this direct line of communication from God, and God tells him in the 10 Commandments, he says some very basic things, almost more like kindergarten ethics if you think about it. Like, hey, don't steal. Makes sense, right? Don't covet. Makes sense, right? You don't want to live life wanting what everybody else has. Don't murder. Hopefully that makes sense to you. If not, we might need you to hook you up with a counselor, right? Don't murder. He gives some very basic things. And in that, he also says, I want you to make time to rest. Like, according to God, taking time to rest is just as basic as not murdering someone. He says, don't murder right along with honor the Sabbath and keep it holy. take time off to recharge. Take time off to center yourself back on your relationship with God. Take time off and trust that in 6 days, God can do more than you could do with 7. Take the time off. But Moses is day after day just sitting and listening. He's trying to judge, and day after day, guess what's happening? He's getting a little more burnout. It's just another day where his family hasn't been brought back to him yet because things haven't slowed down enough. It's just another day that he's keeping himself busy managing instead of leading. It's just one more day staying busy. You'll get burnt out, and everyone around you gets burned. Think about the people in Moses' day. They're waking up early. They're showing up to wherever Moses is, and they're waiting in line to hear from him all day. So you have some people that realistically in their lifetime will never see justice with the way things are currently set up with Moses. That they could stand there day after day and possibly never ever get their case heard before him. That will never ever hear from him whether or not they're right or they're wrong. They'll never ever get what they need. Somebody will continue to take advantage of them because Moses has a system set up that's all about him. When you're overwhelmed and overworked, not only does it affect you, but it begins to affect everyone around you. Some of you guys have heard this story before, but I like to share it because it's definitely one of the lowlights of my life, and I think that's awesome for you guys to realize because I look really cool, that I'm really not that great. So my first church I ever worked at was a church plant in a little town called Inman, South Carolina. Went there fresh out of college, and we had just gotten married about 5 months before we moved there. We were in college in Tennessee. And so we're newlyweds. And when you're newlyweds, you're figuring a lot of things out, right? Like I was still trying to figure out where do I put the towel when I'm done with it because I just throw it down on the ground, or where do I put things away because I tend to just like if I eat something in the living room, just like ball it up and leave it in the living room, right? Still do that. But, you're figuring things out. There's a lot of tension early on because you love each other. You're so happy to be married, but dude, I didn't even have a sister. I had never lived with a girl before. It was my mom and 3 dudes, all right? We could walk around in our underwear all day if we wanted to. Nobody's going to say anything. We had the numbers, right? We won the numbers game. But we moved to South Carolina, and I'll just be honest, the move created a lot of tension for us, created a lot of fights to where we were fighting almost on a daily basis. And it got to the place where my refuge from that was to go to this church that I wasn't even paid full time to be there. In fact, most of the time I was there, I wasn't even paid. I was laying floors during the day, and then I'd go work at the church at night. And every single night, Katie would text me or call me, and she'd say, hey, when are you going to be home? And I'd just be like, hey, just a little bit longer, just a little bit longer. And one night, I knew she was frustrated, but honestly, I wanted to impress people at work. I wanted to get the work done. And one night, I kept putting her off. I said, I'll be home in a little bit. And then I was really thrilled because all of a sudden, she just quit texting me. Oh, that's awesome. I can just keep working. So I worked till 3 a.m. that morning at the church. And I got home thinking, I'll just sneak in. Katie will be asleep. I can tell her I got home at whatever time I want. She's not going to know. Well, guess what? I opened the door, and the light turns on. 3 o'clock in the morning. And how many of you guys know she was not waiting to give me a hug when I got there that morning? 3 a.m, I get there, and we talked for a long, I don't know exactly how long it was that night, but we had to have a really serious discussion that night. And it was the first time that I really realized, and I think this was just the grace of God in my life, that I realized, man, I'm doing this thing wrong. Like my wife is getting burnt out because I'm making it all about me and my career, trying to grow this student ministry that we had just started with 2 kids, trying to make this church look more and more impressive because we were just getting going. I had gotten everything so messed up that I did not realize how much I had hurt my wife and how much it was hurting our marriage. It would have been very easy to look at her and go, well, babe, you just don't understand. You don't get it. Luckily that night, God didn't let me say anything like that. I knew from the time I stepped in the door how wrong I was. When you are overwhelmed and overworked with work, you get burnt out, but everyone around you gets burned. So Jethro, he shares this honesty with him, and he gives him some advice. He says, hey, I want you to find some capable men because we're going to take this work, we're going to take most of it off of your shoulders, and we're going to get you to a place where you're no longer just managing God's people, but you get to lead them because we don't want you stalled out here. We want you to move forward like God told you to. And so all of a sudden he says, I want you to find capable men, and you're going to find them who can judge over different ranges of people, and you're going to let them handle all the little disputes, and the big ones that they can't handle, man, you're going to take care of those. Jethro says, hey, if this is what you should do, man, roll with it. And he says this in verse 23. We read it already. We're going to read it again. He says, if you follow this advice and if God commands you to do so, then you will be able to endure the pressures, and all these people will go home in peace. So in other words, if you're willing to do the work, and it's the work that God's wanting you to do, then you're going to be able to handle the pressure that comes your way. I can't help but imagine how many of us would be happier if we felt like we could properly handle pressure that comes with our career. Or if we could properly handle some of the disappointment that comes with it, or the hurt that's come with it, the pain that comes with it. You spend a third of your time there, you're surely going to get burned from time to time. I can't help but imagine how many of us would love to handle that pressure just a little bit better. But he doesn't even just stop there. He says, hey, but everyone around you is going to go home in peace. Everyone around you is going to get to experience something they've never, ever experienced from you before. They're going to get to have peace even in their own homes. See, when I think back at the time where I was messing up my marriage, yes, it affected me, but it didn't really sink in until I realized how much it affected the people that I loved. And I think for many of us, we're the same way with our work. It can affect us, but we don't really think about how serious it is until we realize how much it's affecting the people in our lives that we love. Moses, what he needed in that moment was somebody who was honest enough to show him, here's how you can get some peace, and here's how everyone else around you can get some peace. So here's what I want to do this morning. Last few moments that we have where I'm going to share with you. I could sit up here and give you strategies, okay? We could talk for 20 minutes about how you can do more by doing less and all these different things that are great approaches to work and all that stuff. But here's what I know to be true. When I realized that I was overwhelmed and overworked, I didn't need my wife or somebody else to tell me, well, here's the new strategy. You get off work, here's what time you go home and all this stuff. I kind of got some of that automatically, that things needed to change. What I needed in that moment was I needed peace in my soul. What I needed in that moment was peace that was bigger than just reprioritizing my schedule. That was bigger than just me trying to figure out the best strategy to follow through on. Those things are important. They're just not the most important thing. And so I love what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 11. He's speaking to his followers. He's speaking to some other people. And he's specifically speaking to some people who are overwhelmed and just burnt out. And he says this in Matthew 11, starting in verse 28. He says, come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens. Notice who Jesus is asking. He's inviting them to come to him. He's saying, come to me if you're worn out, you're overworked, you're overwhelmed, if you're carrying a burden that's too heavy for yourself, come to me. And notice the promise he gives. And I will give you rest. Now, Jesus isn't messing with people here. He's not saying it just like, I might give you rest. I might help you out. He's saying, if you'll simply come to me, bring your burden, bring the fact that you're overwhelmed, bring the fact that you're not perfect, bring that to me, come to me, and I will give you rest. He continues to take my yoke upon you. Let me teach you, because I'm gentle and humble at heart, and you will find rest for your souls. Here's why that's important. You know, you could have the greatest job ever, have the greatest strategy ever for the time you're at work, and yet you could still be laying in bed up all night because you don't have peace for your soul. You can still be sitting there thinking there's more. There's something else to this. You could still be completely missing the point. And you might have the job you want, but it not be the career that God's called you to. When I was a senior in high school, I already told you, I wanted to be in sports business. That's what I wanted to do more than anything. I was so excited about it. But halfway through my senior year, I was hanging out in my parents' basement all by myself. I was lifting weights because you got to clean the guns every once in a while. And I was lifting weights, and I was down there, and on my CD player in my bedroom down in the basement, I had all these preset radio stations because, you know, if your parents show up, you can't keep listening to gangster rap. You got to turn to the Fish or whatever else it is. So I had it set, like preset number 4. If they come downstairs, I can hit the button, and all of a sudden I can just go from like rapping to, right? Just do that thing. Well, I was just thumbing through. It was like midnight, okay? Couple days after my birthday, halfway through my senior year. And I'm just like flipping through the stations while I'm in between sets. And I'm sitting on the edge of my bed, and I get to the Christian preset station, and I hear this song that I've heard before that I thought was just like the cheesiest song ever. I still think it's really cheesy. But I heard that song, and automatically it was like something in me broke. Like, dude, I just sat on the edge of my bed and I started bawling my eyes out. Because I realized in that moment, everything I thought was going to go so well for me, everything I had planned, everything I had dreamed, at 18 years old, I'm having some deep thought. I'm sitting on the edge of my bed and I just kind of held my hands out like this and I realized, and I said this out loud all by myself. It's weird. I talked to myself. I said, I have nothing. I have nothing. And I sat there in my bedroom. I sat there on the edge of my bed, weeping for a couple hours that night. And I'd been to church. I grew up in church. My parents have gone to church my entire life. They still go to church. I just started to pray the little bit I knew how to. All I wanted in that moment, all I wanted was peace with God. Because I realized I'd been trying to run from that and find success in so many other ways. I was so pumped up about my future when I didn't realize that, you know what? As much as I wanted to go into sports business, God was going to call me to be a pastor. And 3 months later, hanging out in a youth group, I'm sitting up in this upper room over this gym. I have this thought. I'm looking at my youth pastor who I still love. He planted a church in Tennessee. And I look at him and I go, I hear this impression from God. You could do what he does. You know what my answer was? No stinking way, right? In fact, I'm pretty sure I used a different word than stinking back then. I was still figuring it out. Like, there's no way. But here's the thing. I'm here now, 11 years later, almost 12 years later, and I'm realizing, dude, as much as times have been hard and as difficult as things have been, I've never been more satisfied with the work that I'm doing. I'm working harder than I've ever worked, making less money than I've ever made. No joke. But I'm loving every second of it. Because what I learned my senior year of high school in my bedroom in my parents' house, and what I've constantly been reminded of is the promise that James gives us in James chapter 4, verse 8. The brother of Jesus says this. He says, come close to God, and God will come close to you. Other translations say, come near to God, and God will come near to you. Get close to God, and God will get close to you. That God doesn't have to wait for me to be perfect to decide I want peace in my soul and I want it to be better. God's simply waiting. He's saying, you know what, if you take one step forward, I'm going to meet you right there. And so this morning, here's what I want to promise you. I'm going to promise you the same thing Jesus promised his followers. If you decide to take one step closer today, you don't have to have it all figured out. You don't have to have all the strategy. We're going to email you some stuff this week. You're going to love it. It's going to help you with the strategy. But you just have to start with the knowledge that, okay, something needs to change and I need to come to Jesus. So here in just a moment as we stand, we get ready to pray, I'm going to challenge you that way. I want you to know. I want you to think about it. So if you will, right now where you are, if you'll stand up on your feet, Kyle's going to come back up and he's going to lead us in a moment or a few moments of worship here. But I'd like to simply just pray for us right now, okay? Let's pray together. Jesus, I thank you so much for the time that we have together. God, once again, I am so keenly aware that every time we come together, we have these moments of clarity where we hear from you, and that now we're given an opportunity to respond. So God, my prayer is that, number one, you'll give us courage, you'll give us strength. God, for many of us here, the easy thing to do is just to go back home and act like nothing needs to change, nothing needs to be different. And yet, Jesus, you look at your followers, you look at people all around you, even people in your day, and you're saying, if you are overwhelmed and overworked, if you are carrying heavy burdens, I just want you to come to me, and I'll give you rest for your souls. If you come to me, I'm going to give you rest. If you come to me, I'm going to help you experience peace like you've never experienced before. It's not momentary peace like everything else has to offer, but it's an internal peace that in the midst of whatever the situation, in the midst of whatever the circumstance, it's there with us.